Also joining us online is Fiora Garcia Miramon, who is the director of Check in Mexico. And here in the room, we have Maria Luciano from IDECI, based here in Brazil, and Armando Manueta Peña, who joins us from the Dominican Republic Ministry of Economic Development. So at this point, we've seen in many instances around the world the enormous impact that DPI can have on financial inclusion. Hello? Okay, sorry, that cut out. But at the same time, we know that if it is not designed, deployed, and governed with consumer interests at the heart, that it can actually lead to further disenfranchisement of the very people that it seeks to serve. DPI has been great for industry. It's lowered transaction costs, making them almost negligible. This has fostered competition and choice. It's lowered barriers to entry for small and medium enterprises. This in turn has been great for consumers. However, at the same time, if consumer interests like digital and financial literacy, power supplies, internet access, data protection, cybersecurity, etc., aren't taken into consideration, DPI can in fact have a deleterious effect. We've also seen the rise of scams and fraud related to DPI, which has absolutely skyrocketed, for example, in India. So I'm really pleased to have the opportunity to discuss further some of these elements with my colleagues now. And on that note, I will hand over to Armando, who will share some learnings and challenges that he's observed from his experiences in the public sector. Thank you, Armando.
Thanks so much, Hannah. First of all, I would like to thank you for the invitation to join this panel today. This topic, digital public infrastructures, especially aimed at the financial markets, is a topic that I have deeply to heart because I've been involved with both the fintech ecosystem and the payments ecosystem in the DDR for a very long time. I actually worked at the central bank at some point, defining regulations for cybersecurity and payments, and of course within this scope where we can allow more people to be included using these technologies in one way or another. So I think we all know here that the digital payments are key to drive financial inclusion, and if we have the proper platforms for payments in countries, we can even add at least 3% of the GDP in emerging markets just by having different means to pay using digital technologies. Since COVID, all related to the payments ecosystem has been increasing tenfold in all nations because it highlighted the need to have means to transact in cases where emergency happens, and because of it, many governments have taken the initiative to build not just to have like the core financial markets infrastructures, which mostly RTGS, but also to build systems upon this that attends the last mile consumers, people in general, to do these transactions. In most cases, we have the example, of Brazil that implemented PIX, which is a system that is embedded within the bank accounts of each person that allows them to pay to do peer-to-peer payments one way or another. In the case of India, which is like one of the most famous, you have UPI, which is a bit more advanced. They set up even a company to handle this. And basically, they constructed this whole system that goes even beyond PIX, that does not just peer-to-peer payments, but also handles all kinds of transactions across the digital world, and also intersecting with the physical world as well. So in that regard, what we have done in the Dominican Republic is that, of course, we have this core system, which is an RTGS. But we decided to have a kind of middle-of-the-road approach because we have this infrastructure, which is open at some extent. All the authorized payment systems can connect to this platform and must connect to this platform and do all the transactions that are done. They should be through this platform. And what we do is we allow to certain regulations to have key or other operators that comes mostly from the private sector to handle the transactions that goes to retail payments from the consumers to enterprises or from the government to other companies. Then, in the case of government to citizens payments, what we've done is basically an alliance with key commercial banks, especially the one that is actually run by the government, and in alliance with the major consumer credit card brands, we created this. It's not an application per se, but rather we have a physical card that all subsidies are handed to that card to the persons that actually need it. We've been, however, at some point during the pandemic, we tried to build another kind of DPI, which is something similar to what Pix is, where we generated an bank account to each person using their own ID number plus four extra characters for them in order for them to receive the subsidies that the government were giving out for the people that were affected by the suspension of jobs and of the whole pandemic thing in order to sustain the consumer market. And but that wasn't the most efficient way. So what we're doing now is we're of course analyzing ways where we can create again another sort of middle of the road infrastructure for people to be able to use digital payments, not just for the government but also from the private sector as well, and then start doing the kind of things they should do. I mean, we can foment more in financial inclusion and also find ways for them to have access to more financial services through that way. Another thing that of course we're considering is some changes to the payment system bylaw in order to have a stronger consumer rights protections. Right now we have some guardrails on that front. For example, all contracts are revised before they become into full force between the payment aggregators and the payment operators and the consumers, especially the ones that comes from the digital money wallets and other sort of applications. In this case, in particular, in order to prevent predatory practices from them to consumers. We also have an agreement with the Banking Supervision Authority because they already have a very strong consumer protection framework in place. So we basically lean on them to handle most of the cases that comes from people with payment operators in the country, and including the cases that comes from the subsidies that comes from the agency that runs the subsidies from the government as well. And then they permanently consult with the central bank regarding what things can go right and what things can go wrong. And then what we're trying to do is to strengthen the framework that actually exists in order for consumers to have a more clear set of rights regarding this. And of course, this will be tied as well with the payment infrastructure that will succeed the current that we are planning to integrate into the RTGS in the near future for citizens to use on that front. On the other side, on the government subsidies, there's also been talks regarding the implementation of some sort of wallet that will consolidate all kinds of subsidies that people might receive from the government. And this, of course, will come with some sort of digital onboarding using some biometrics and digital ID platforms as well. And of course, the idea is to have a clear framework on how this data should be used when people get onboarded on that. And of course, we have clear mandates regarding data governance for that platform as well. So we currently have strong data protection rules for social subsidies, but again, this necessarily aren't transparent to citizens. So basically, we know that we're doing this, but most people doesn't necessarily know how we're using their data. So the idea with this is like to also provide them with this information, more transparency on how we use the information to handle social subsidies, but as well give them some options in order for them to have a better use of the subsidies that they give, and they have more control on that money as well. So they basically can have access to their balance. They can have access to the places that they can actually use the subsidies, because it's restricted right now. And of course, to find a more friendly and private way to control this. And of course, cybersecurity is an integral part of all of this. And because basically it's one of the pain points that we are trying to address, because the system itself there has been some cyber attacks intents in the past. Some of them may have succeeded at a certain extent. So what we're trying to do is like to increase the cybersecurity that it's around the system as well. And this is the whole idea with this. Of course, putting always the people in the front of these efforts.
Armando, thank you so much for your really rich and interesting comments. I think there's going to be a lot of follow-up and discussion. I'd love to learn more. But in the interest of time at the moment, I'm going to pass over to my colleague Fior. I think you have a presentation to share. It might just take a moment to set up, but please feel free to kick off whenever you're ready. Thank you.
Thank you, Hannah, and thank you for the people that it's in the room and online. I'm going to share the presentation. Let me know if you can see it.
We can see it now. You might want to make it full screen.
No, I'm just trying. Perfect. So first of all, my name is Fiorentina. I am the co-founder, as already Anna said, of TechCheck. TechCheck is the first civil association in Mexico. We are the first consumer organization that is focused on the digital economy. We are a Mexican-German team, and something very important to highlight is that we dedicate ourselves to TechCheck as a social commitment during our free time. We have three areas of work. The first one is that the transparency of e-commerce and social networks. We, for example, monitor Instagram or TikTok for influencers marketing and the transparency on that. We enforce consumer rights through the facilitation of collective complaints. And we also request accountability from the authorities, Profeco, Conducef, COFEPRIS, INAI, that are the authorities in charge of the consumer protection, the consumer financial protection, and also data protection and privacy. So it's important to highlight how are we in Mexico in terms of financial inclusion. And the first point to remember is that here in Mexico, we have a big challenge in terms of financial inclusion. Why? Because according to the last Global Financial Index, 49% of the Mexicans, adult population, have a savings account. And in terms of made or receive a digital payment, we are talking about 44%. Those are levels very low if we compare, for example, with Brazil or other countries in Latin America that have a lower size of economy. Who are the most excluded in the financial sector in Mexico? Women. And even with the pandemic, with the COVID, this bridge between men and women in the financial sector is bigger than it was. Digital payments are mainly made by young people between 15 and 24 years old, and that increase after COVID. So we are also having a big challenge in terms of usability and the age or the generation that are using the digital payments. Which is the digital public infrastructure that we have for payments? Its name is SPAY. It's an infrastructure developed in-house by the central government, which it's something very curious, but it's made for consumers without traditional bank accounts. What I mean for that is that you always need a bank account if you want to use SPAY. So SPAY don't work with digital wallets, for example, even though the vision of SPAY when central bank announced it is that for all Mexicans have the possibility of sending and receiving secure, immediate, efficient, and commission-free electronic payments. In the Mexican reality, that it's not happening based on the characteristics of the infrastructure. What are the main characteristics? All users need a bank account to make the transfer via the app or the platform. So we need to identify ourselves with our bank account number, in comparison with PICs that you can give your name, your email, or other data, personal data that you have. In Mexico, it's only the clave, that is the number account that the bank provides you when you are a client. The second main characteristic is that it's not free for users. Actually, it's around $0.10 per transfer. And other main characteristic of Spain that changed the game for the market is the participation by big banks, is not mandatory. So there are some banks that are already in SPAY, but they are not using other technologies that the SPAY has developed, for example, to facilitate the transfer using your cell phone number. What are one of the opportunities that we identify with the SPAY is that it can serve as an effective measure to enhance payment security. That it's a big issue here in Mexico. If we consider the complaints that we have for non-recognized operations or transactions. In Mexico, 49% of the complaints are related to cash or charges or transfers that the clients don't recognize as them, as they were doing that. 25% of the complaints are related to non-recognized transfers and charges. And as we can see here, the app and the platforms, like the digital transfer, are, more secure than other typical payment infrastructure, such as the debit cards or the credit cards. As TechCheck, we identify consumer protection opportunities in SPAY, mainly two. The first one is the digital wallets. We think that is necessary to discuss how digital wallets can support more consumers to use the SPAY system. As we said, it will be very important for the big banks to be mandatory, but also for fintech that they can develop another ways of other infrastructure that consumer can access to SPAY, even if they don't have a traditional bank account. And the second big opportunity for consumer protection is the fees that consumers need to pay. For example, how we can improve the information that they receive when they do the transfer, and especially how we can include more providers in the system to make this SPAY infrastructure more competitive. And finally, we want to do an announcement for the people that are watching us and listening us. The last month we published a report. If you want to understand more how the financial sector is working in Mexico, what are the rights and complaints that consumers face in this market, we developed this report. And thank you very much, Hannah, for the time in this presentation.
It's an absolute pleasure. Thank you so much, Fior, for your presentation. We're ready to move over now to our colleague in India. Saroja, over to you whenever you're ready.
Thank you. I'm Saroja from the Citizen Consumer and Civic Action Group, CAG, India. We are based in a state called Tamil Nadu, south of India. And so we are a 38-year-old non-profit organization working on consumer and environmental protection issues here in India. So we recently worked on a project supported by the FDFA grant by Consumers International, and I would like to share our experience. It was on digital financial services, and the objective of the study was to understand the perspectives of and experiences and challenges faced by various stakeholders from select rural areas from India, from the state that I come from, like farmers, students, women, and small businesses who are into digital financial, who are using the digital financial services. So we wanted to speak to them and get their perspective. And the next objective was to educate consumers on safe digital finance, so through IEC materials and some capacity building programs. And the third was basically to guide, in case they had some problems, to guide them on whom to approach and how to get their issues resolved. So we wanted to have some run some consumer guidance clinics to guide these consumers, and also to based on our interactions with the consumers, rural consumers, we wanted to submit a charter of demands to the regulator for further action. So this was these were the objectives under the project. And so within what we did was we did a survey of around 2,000 consumers, of which 500 were farmers, 500 were women who were from self-help groups, and 500 small businesses and 500 youth, all from rural areas. So, and then we actually developed some IEC materials. We developed some videos, and we printed some awareness materials on being digitally safe. And we also conducted some programs, awareness programs in those districts where we went to do the surveys and organize these consumer guidance clinic that I mentioned earlier. So what we, from the interactions, what we found was one of the major issues that we found was this digital lending, which is happening rampantly, and which is not regulated at all. So many, especially women from the districts we saw, were falling prey to this, because very easily, without any papers, they were offered a loan, and small amounts actually. So without informing the family, there were a few who came to us with a complaint actually, or who shared their experience actually, where in Indian money, they had taken, for example, 10,000 INR as a loan, which was offered digitally. So they took the loan, and then they were threatened. They were actually made to repay around 50,000 rupees in INR. The repayment was that much actually, like several times more. And they couldn't do anything since they were forced, they were compelled to actually, otherwise they were threatened with like saying, like, we will post something on social media about you, we will inform your family. So things like this were used, words like this were used, and they were actually compelled. They didn't have an option. They had to pay much, much more than what they had taken as a loan. So this happens to be then this particular lady who shared with us her experience, like she had to then, after paying more than 50,000, he was the person who had given her the money was insisting for more. Then she had to inform her family, go to the police, and all that happened. So this is one area which we found that consumers were really especially from the rural areas, they are facing issues. Similarly, network connectivity is another major problem because when we talk about digital transaction in India, especially the central government is actively promoting digital transaction and they are saying digital India. And so it's being actively promoted, but the one major issue is connectivity, very poor internet data connectivity in the rural areas especially, which seems to be a major obstacle for digital transactions. So this is another issue that we noticed, because of which what is happening is even people having these who are using digital financial services, they face problems because transactions don't happen immediately. So when they make a payment, they don't know if the payment has reached. And at times it like the situation so happens that they end up paying twice for the same, for one service or for one purchase. So this is another major issue that we observed. Another issue that we noticed was that is the language. So India is a country of multiple languages. So when the transaction the communication is in English, like many people from rural areas, the state that I come from, we speak a language called Tamil. So people from the rural areas know only Tamil and very rarely they understand English actually. So language appears to be a major problem. So they expect, the expectation is that it should be in vernacular language so that they understand the communication when it comes to digital transactions. So this was one issue that many people raised, where people whom we were talking to. And another issue that came up was about grievance redress. Grievance redress, actually, they don't know whom to approach, how to get an issue resolved. That is one issue. The other issue is, even if they represent, there is no response, there is no action. They don't, very often, they don't get a resolution for the complaint. So this is another problem that we noticed. Another important issue that we noticed was that people using these, more than 25% of them actually depend on other people because they don't know the language or they don't know how to digitally transact. So they take the help of other people to transact digitally. So this is an area of concern, I would say, because if they are even within families today, we don't know how your account or your money could be misused. So here they take the help of friends, they take the help of outsiders to actually transact. For example, if they go to an ATM to withdraw money, so like they just ask the person standing outside to help them with getting the money from the ATM machine. So this was another issue that came to our notice. And the other major thing is about literacy. So many of them, we saw that they lack knowledge enough. They don't have enough knowledge about the space, how to be safe while transacting, and also grievance redress, whom to approach and what to do, and those things. So several of these actually where we need to continuously engage with them to educate them on how to transact safely online. So this was also another issue that we identified when we did the survey and we were talking to the people from the rural areas. So based on all this, actually, so of course we did all our awareness programs and all that, but like our charter of demands basically were based on what we found from the ground actually. So based on that, we submitted our demands to the regulator. There were around 12 or 13 demands, whatever I listed now. It was mostly that actually. And of course, we included need for transparency in the way the financial products were actually made available to the consumer. We said that should be transparency. The terms and conditions should be clear to the consumer so that they are able to make informed decisions. So this was one of our demands, other than what I had mentioned earlier. And yeah, so basically these were sent as as demands based. The report and the demands were submitted to the regulator, and we are following up with them on action for on these so that consumers stand to benefit. So yeah, I would like to thank Hannah and team for this wonderful opportunity to present our study here. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Saroja. I assure you the pleasure is ours. And finally, I would like to hand over to Maria here in the room with us representing IDEC. Thank you.
Thank you so much for having me, Hannah. I'd like to start by thanking Hannah for putting this panel together and all her Consumer International team. So thank you so much for having me. So yeah, I have prepared a presentation. Let me see if I can. Okay, thank you, Hannah, for trying. Yeah, we have some technical issues here, but yeah, I'm happy to start my presentation. I'm currently working for the Brazilian Institute for Consumer Defense on the DPI project. We're mainly focusing on looking into PIX, the PIX system, and the gov.br. I think it's a very interesting opportunity for us to tell the stories behind those systems. I feel like everyone is talking about the India case and it's starting to talk about PIX, but there's a lot of stories behind what came to be and ended up being PIX. So we're very keen to tell those stories and give voice to some of the actors behind the scenes. I'm also part of the DPI Safeguards initiative run by the UN for the organization working group. So again, another opportunity for us to think about how to make DPI systems safe and inclusive. As a representative of IDEC, I'm also part of the PIX Forum, which is the governance forum of the PIX system within the Brazilian Central Bank. And finally, I'm also one of the co-facilitators for the C20 group on government and digitalization. And again, another opportunity for us to talk about DPI with an amazing group of activists and NGOs around the world. I think I'd like to start with, talking about when we're talking about financial inclusion in Brazil, and especially concerning DPI, we think a lot about PIX. And it is a very successful story, and we're very proud of it, of course. But when you're in Brazil and you're like bombed with all these stories about fraud and all the issues behind it, it's kind of easy to lose a bit of track of how successful it is. So I like to start by sharing a few numbers presented by the Brazilian Central Bank. So I think the first one will be oh, sorry. Thank you so much. Yeah, I think we can move on without it. But thank you for trying. I have it here a few information that I'd like to share in terms of numbers. But I think just to for the sake of setting the debate, I think it's important to explain. Our PIX system is an instant digital payment system between Brazilian banks. Which allows a money transfer within seconds and 24/7. But again, to be able to make PIX transactions, you must have a Brazilian bank account. And within the app of your bank, you'll find a special area for PIX transactions and PIX information. So the PIX was launched in 2020 in February by the Brazilian Central Bank. And it was an alternative to make transactions without the fees that we have for transactions within different bank accounts. As of October 2023, there were over 146 million individual users and over 14 million companies. As a company having a bank account and therefore using PIX to make transactions. Brazilians have done nearly 42 billion transactions via PIX in 2023 last year, which was an increase of 75% in comparison to the year before 2022. And we recently, early this month, on the 5th of July, we had a new record of 220 million transactions in only 24 hours in Brazil. And that's that idea of setting different records is something that is always on the news. Like every single day, there's a new record in terms of PIX transactions. So it's very interesting to see and explore that. I think, drawing for Sarah's point as well, I think it's worth mentioning that language is also very important for us. And I think, within the DPI discussion, I think it's always important to have that in mind. The very expression in the name digital public infrastructure was, created for a different purpose. And then, somewhere along the way, we started using for something that already existed in different regions, mostly led by the Global South. And, the term has been more used from people from the North. So there's definitely an example there about how language matters within those discussions and how actors play along this process. But also for us in terms of language, also we are concerned at EDEC of reclaiming the narrative about PIX. When PIX first started, it was a big hit. I mean, we had a lot of memes on Twitter and stuff, and people, so excited to be able to make those transactions without having to pay fees. There's even jokes about, I barely have money, but I'm doing PIX just to test it because it's super effective and new. But also, PIX has been used as a form of communication because once you schedule a transaction, you can also add a message. And then, there are people making PIX transactions of only 1 cent of real just to, start a conversation as a form of communication. But of course, with all the novelty, some problems start to appear for us. I think, obviously I think the cases of fraud and schemes being created every day, like new schemes being implemented and socially designed, it's also a big thing and has created a few issues of trust and how people have been perceiving and using PIX. And also in terms, again, as I mentioned, people using PIX as a form of communication. And again, that also has been a form of use for abusers to stalk ex-girlfriends or to arrest or for hate speech. So it's interesting to see how, when we're talking about this kind of systems that are so, broadly used and adopted, new problems arise every day, which leave us to a concern of us in terms of governance, right? These problems are being created every day because of the way people use it and because of the way people perceive those systems. So it's really interesting to notice in the PIX case how people have been excluded of conversations around design and regulation, even though they are the ones at the end, dealing with all the issues and using and thinking about it. And then again, when we go back to the what I was talking about language, even when we're talking about within the central bank about PIX and the conversations about governance, there's always references to participants of the PIX systems. But the thing is, participants refers to the banks within the financial Brazilian system. So it's really interesting to see that, participants in the PIX are perceived only as banks. So users are not included in that group. Again, another issue of language and how it kind of reflects the rationale behind it. So yeah, and then, just to go to the last part of my presentation, I would like to point, a few shortcomings about the PIX systems that we've been thinking about and seeing, reflecting on it at EDEC. But I love to bring others to the conversation for sure. I think the first, has been already talked about, discussions around both financial and digital literacy. Again, a lot of the schemes that we've been seeing are, based on how people don't trust the systems or don't understand even the language or how the media and the social and online space work. So there's a lot to explore over there, but also in terms of understanding about finance and how to manage your money and how to, make better transactions and also things like people giving discounts when you pay with using PIX transaction. But the thing is, it's not really that much of a discount. They are only taking out the fees they won't have to pay because PIX transactions don't have fees. And the second, following financial and digital literacy, I think the second point that I'd like to bring to discussion is the matter of inclusion. And with that, I mean a bunch of different things and different inequality markers. We have, discussions around internet access. In Brazil, people in the north, in the northeast, in rural areas, women are behind in terms of connectivity. Or even using mobile apps, and most of internet access in Brazil happens through mobile phones. And when women usually, when they're within the household, women don't have their own cell phones. They use the family cell phones, and with that come different obviously aspects within those interactions. There's a matter of difference in terms of region. People in the north and the northeast making less PIX transactions according to the Brazilian Central Bank numbers, and also people with lower socioeconomic status also are amongst those making less PIX transactions. So again, a conversation around, financial literacy, and also how to make the PIX system useful and efficient for those people that are, dealing with different aspects of economic and financial correspondence. And also another important aspect to bring is about, people in debt in Brazil. There's a we say here that, death in Brazil has a very specific face. It's usually women under 35 without high school education, living in the south and the southern regions, with family earns up to 10 minimum wage salaries. So it's dealing, again, we're talking about gender and DPI. There's a difference there. Again, how to make those DPI systems more efficient and more better equipped to deal with people who need them the most. A third problem, shortcoming that we like to bring, is about security. I think, again, every day in the news, we see different cases of data breaches happening within the central bank and within PIX. I think if you're mentioning, how we need a clave or a PIX key to use and transfer through PIX. And, those keys usually are personal data, so email or national ID number or phone number. So having that type of data, out there in such a large amount, so many people using it, and that type of data breach obviously has a lot of impactful consequences. And the security problem also brings me to another one, which is redress. Again, we're talking about all this socially designed schemes to trick people to make mistakes and fraudulent transactions, and that brings shame. So on the one hand, you have people not knowing what to do when something goes wrong with PIX. They don't know where to ask for help, or all the systems that are in place to help with that. But there's also the social aspect of shame, like people don't feel comfortable acknowledging that they were a victim of those type of systems. So again, my point about language and starting a conversation to address these issues. And also in terms of how different schemes are being created every single day. We have the PIX system, and the Brazilian Central Bank has a process called MED, hoping to help people get reimbursed in case of fraudulent transactions. But nobody really knows about the systems in terms of end users and consumers. And now they are talking about a MED 2.0, to make better improvements within the PIX forum. But again, people barely knew about the first one, and now we're starting to talk about the second one without much of inclusion, without a broader conversation. Even IDEC is part of the PIX forum. We weren't accepted in the specific MED discussion group right now that is happening right now. So again, how to bring, how to keep consumers away of the discussions in a way. So yeah, we're hoping to have a say in further discussions. And then my last and final shortcoming that I'd like to bring also relates to that. It's governance. And again, our main concern in DEC right now is shedding light to those different stories behind PIX. They are different from the official ones that we've been hearing so much. And even, again, my point of language, we're talking about consumers, but that doesn't necessarily mean the two ends of a transaction and a relationship. And then when we're talking about data, obviously other people's data impact us and impact how companies perceive us and how company offers service to us. So we're talking about including consumers within the conversation and talking about more transparent and participatory governance. We're talking about this broader idea of consumers and how we can impact these different conversations and make those systems more efficient to all. And then again, I think that this is very clear when we see PIX numbers when it comes to elderly use, how elderly people trust the system less than younger users, or even when we're talking about, people in poverty not using PIX as much, there's also data from the Brazilian Central Bank stating that they're part of the CAD Único, which is the Brazilian database for people living in poverty and hoping to get welfare aid. People within the CAD Único and also people who are getting benefits from the Bolsa Familia program, they are using PIX less. And again, how to include these people in the conversation if we're talking about interoperability and how to make everything as a whole and facilitating communication. Is it weird to see that people that are receiving and needing those fair welfare help and aid are as included as they should be within the financial inclusion conversation? But yeah, I think those are my main points for today. Thank you so much, Hannah. And I'm always available to continue this conversation because obviously there's a lot to think about. So thank you so much for your attention.
Thank you so much. Okay, so wow, lots of different points there that I think demonstrate that despite the rapid and broad uptake of DPI with the goal of financial inclusion, that there are still a lot of issues that are really important for consumers to be involved in at the forefront in addressing. So some of the elements to consider from the presentations today include consumer safety, literacy, connectivity, and also access to devices, security, interoperability, inclusive, meaningful language, transparency, fit-for-purpose regulation and enforcement. Also, the development of new services being offered to consumers via DPI, such as loans and their implications, for example, to debt. Fee structures for transactions like Fiora talked about in Mexico, and the necessity to already meet a certain degree of of social inclusion to be included in DPI. For example, you have to have a bank account and meet the requirements that are necessary to have that. We talked about governance, gender equality, meaningful mechanisms for redress, and also unexpected and unintended uses of these technologies. So I have some questions of my own, but I'd like to first open to the floor in case there's any questions from audience members. Great, thank you. There in the back. Oh, I see our person's, okay, one second, excuse me.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much for your very insightful presentations. I have a more general question, actually. Wouldn't cash be more inclusive and safe for these people? I mean, why do these infrastructures need to be digital in the first place?
Okay, great. We'll start with Armando. Thank you.
Well, digital, why digital? Well, mostly because it allows more people to be actually included into the system. It allows for the governments to have a proper way, not to track people, but to dimension the impact of payments in the economy. It also helps for the people as well to have access to a more broad set of products and services that can be acquired throughout electronic channels for digital commerce, for example, to happen. It also allows the government to facilitate the transfer of social subsidies for poverty mitigation or to give some sort of assistance in case of disaster of what happened with COVID, when most people cannot go to work. So one or another, they had to have some money for them to subside throughout the pandemic. And those are like one of the main reasons to have digital payments, because it simplifies the lives of so many people at so many fronts. But of course, that doesn't necessarily translate that it will generate inclusion. So there are some certain guardrails that need to be procured in order for payment systems to fulfill the mission of financial inclusion. And that goes with digital literacy. It goes with the construction of complementary systems and norms and standards that allows them to succeed in that front. But yeah, going digital is one of the best things that most economies can do, because it opens up so many possibilities to have a greater reach when it comes to payments and other services as well.
If you think about it, you can send money basically as easily as sending a text message. You don't have to like go to an ATM and take out cash and find an ATM that takes your card, or there's also safety issues in many parts of the world about accessing bank machines. Also, you know, if you make a purchase, you don't have to faff around with change and whatnot. So thank you for your question. I think it's a really good one. There's also a lot of points in the favor of cash, I think, too. Tom, I see that you've got a question over there. I'll hand it to you. Thank you.
Can you hear me? Yes. Thank you. Thank you for the great discussion. I have two questions. One in particular, maybe for about the Indian and Brazilian system. Meaningful redress is something that was mentioned several times, something that really has to work in practice, particularly for systems that have scaled. How does this look like? Everybody talks about this being a requirement, but are there good best cases that you could point to how to actually deliver this in practice to particularly the marginalized parts of society? And then the second question would be, when we talk about DPI and the payment layer, we have inherent arguments against privacy, like double spend, anti-money laundering, terrorist financing. What is the approach to privacy? Like, are there any legal guarantees or technical privacy by design features inherent to the DPI that you find relevant from a user's perspective? Thank you very much.
Thanks. Really great questions. And yes, I think redress for money loss it's on the top of everybody's mind when it comes to financial DPI. In short, in our research so far, we don't see any really strong models, but this is a priority of Consumers International to research in order to make consumer-centric recommendations. One model that's recently come out in the UK, you may have seen, is actually asking industry to cover the money loss. And one thing that's really interesting about that is previously they had no interest, industry, in resolving these issues, but now, you know, they're much more concerned. So I guess that's a really good incentive for them to, you know, be more secure and thoughtful in the design and deployment of technologies in the first place. That model needs to be scrutinized, though, especially in the majority world where, you know, we want to see small and medium enterprises like flourish. So we don't want it to be, you know, particularly burdensome to them. I don't know if any of the panelists had anything to add on that point about redress. Good. Oh, great. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you so much, Hannah, and thank you for your question, Tom. I feel like one example of what not to do in Brazil happened during the pandemic, where, you know, we had a emergency financial aid, and that had to be accessed through a mobile phone, and there are automated decision making involved. So a lot of people had started to question some of the decisions, but they didn't know where to go. And then ultimately, it was up to public defenders to question those decisions. But then again, that on top of all their limited capacity and resources already. And I think also, if I may, I think it also allows us to reinforce our demand to have more consumers organizations within the discussions. I mean, in Brazil, IDEC has been leading all the conversations around consent and data protection, even before we had a general law about it. And also we had a big case this week concerning WhatsApp and Facebook and Meta. So yeah, again, I think Tom's question also brings sheds light to that. We need to have more of these people, you know, thinking about this within the conversation, because we are yet to have good and strong models for meaningful redress, for sure. Thank you.
Thank you so much. It looks like we may have lost Saroja. It's always so nice when the issues that we're talking about, for example, with regards to connectivity, you know, show up live during a presentation. But I see that Fior might also have comments, so please, I'll pass over to you. Thank you.
Sorry, can you hear me? Yes. Sorry, thank you, Tom. I think it was a really great question related to the redress, and it's something that in TechCheck we put a lot of attention, especially via these collective complaints. Maybe we should focus the question around what are you thinking about in terms of redress, and what is the source of the complaint. If it's a data breach, for example, I mean privacy and data protection, and if we are talking about payment systems specifically for DPI, or it's, for example, that the transfer was not made in the terms that the final user asked, in terms, and we are talking, in that case, we are talking about in terms of money. In the first case, we identify that redress for data breaches, at least in Mexico, is very bad. Like, what are the main enterprises are doing when they suffer a cyber attack and they send an email saying to different consumers, to the consumers affected, that, okay, sorry, we have a cyber attack. Maybe your data, to personal data included, for example, the number of your credit card is in the deep web. And that's the only measure of redress that we are identifying from the big tech companies. For example, this weekend in Mexico, Ticketmaster sent an email to thousands of consumers saying that they suffered a cyber attack, and that was the only measure of redress. So in TechCheck, we identified that we need to discuss more how we can compensate consumers when their personal data has been put in risk. Are we going to monitor the financial banks that consumers has as for example, it will be free of charge? It's a service for how many years? Who will pay to the consumers to change, for example, the debit card that the credit card that they need to do because their number is already in risk? What other measures we can think for the consumers that have been affected by these data breaches? And in case of the financial problems, I think also we need to think about measures to compensate the loss of money and time that consumers suffer. Thank you.
Thanks so much, Fior. And yes, I think it's a good point to delineate, we need redress mechanisms for several things, including misuse of personal data and money loss. I think in the interest of time, we have 8 minutes left. I'm going to ask the panelists just to comment on Tom's second question if they're interested, and then to share any other final or closing remarks. So just to remind you, Tom was asking about privacy in DPI payments. And in particular, what legal guarantees are there, and what privacy guarantees can be built into the technologies itself, to the payment layer, like a privacy by design approach. So Maria, I think you had a few final comments about both redress, and then if you want to answer the question about privacy from Tom and anything else, and then I'll pass it over to you, Fior, and then you here, Armando, so you can prep. Thanks.
Thank you so much, Hannah. No, I just wanted to add to Fior's amazing comment that we have been at EDEC, we have been noticed that some fintechs are starting to offer services to help people feel more safe when it comes to PICs. So it is an interesting and scary development to see that all those shortcomings that we've been seeing in PICs are starting to be exploited for by fintechs, by the private sector, as a way to see to make profit out of all these issues and out of people's vulnerabilities and their lack of information where to find redress and how to manage and to seek reimbursement. But again, that also speaks when it comes to communication and language, as I mentioned, and governance issues and stuff. Thank you, Anna.
Did you have any other comments before we close the session? Great. Okay, thanks. Fiora, over to you. If you had any comments about privacy and any other outstanding comments.
No, thank you, Hannah. I think we need to discuss more about the redress in terms of DPI. And as you said, loss of money, privacy, but I can imagine that there are other issues that consumers are already facing. As for example, Maria mentioned the case of pigs with the conversations that sometimes the ex can have with via the pigs. So we are talking in that case of harassment and other problems. Thank you.
Thank you, Fiora, and thanks so much for joining us remotely today. Armando, any closing comments or a response to Tom's question about privacy?
Oh, well, what to say about privacy? I mean, it's one of the most important principles that we have to take into consideration while building a DPI, because I think, especially when it comes to payments, because I think it's a matter of even principle for institutions, because if we don't have like this proper privacy by design architectures and architected within the payment systems, within the DPIs that handles retail payments, especially from a government perspective, we might run a risk, especially in countries that have very authoritative regimes, that this data can be used against certain people and generate harm. So it's important to think about that and to find ways to protect that specific set of information, and of course try to limit who can access that information, because it should be private only between the bank and the person that it's doing the transaction, or the pensions that are involved within that transaction. And because of that same principle that I said before. So yeah, definitely we should take into consideration when building these systems, and yes, and foster more trust and accountability to the people that are involved.
I think that's a huge point that you make about trust and accountability, and how that goes directly to consumer confidence. And, you know, without consumer confidence, we don't have functioning economies. So great. Saroja, we're really glad that you were able to reconnect. We're just closing the session, and we wanted to offer you the opportunity to share any closing or final remarks.
Yeah. With regard to data breach and privacy, I think consumer awareness also, there is a long way to go actually, because consumers don't even know that their information is being shared outside and it's being misused, especially consumers from rural areas, which is like in a country like India, like almost 70% of the people are from rural areas with limited literacy levels, and they don't even know that their information is being shared and it's being misused. So this, on the one hand, we need to raise consumer awareness, like for consumers to raise their voice, to demand that their information is not shared randomly and there is no breach of data privacy and all. So that also has to be considered. And so now I think all the more the role of the government and the regulator is even more to ensure that the consumers' interests are protected in this scenario. And consumer awareness is also much needed, I think. Yeah.
Thanks so much, Saroja.
Thank you. Yeah.
Thank you very much. Thanks everyone for joining us here today. I think we're ending right on the nose. So thank you. I hope you enjoy the rest of the conference. Thanks again to the organizers.
Thank you.
Thank you.